Welcome back to Taking Down Trump and another episode of our special series, Decoding Project 2025, where once again we go to the very heart of darkness, or a more funny way of putting it maybe is what I like to call the boredom fascism sandwich, where I did in fact read all 885 pages of Project 2025 so that you don't have to and can use my fluency in legalese and officialese and policyese to actually help us understand what they're really talking about in this horrible document that is the blueprint for a second Donald Trump term, written by the very people who would be running a second Donald Trump administration and who in most cases were the people who ran his first one. These are people who were the very closest senior cabinet or just sub-cabinet position folks all across the federal government. Dozens of them wrote this document. This is, again, not something that can be separated out from Donald Trump. It's literally his senior officials are the ones who wrote this, very much in conjunction with the overall MAGA Republican establishment. That is what the Heritage Foundation is. It's not some other separate third-party group that just speaks for itself. It is an institutional apparatus. It is an institutional mouthpiece for the right wing of this country, and it has been for decades. Going back to the first time they did one of these was for Ronald Reagan in 1980, and they brag about the fact that most of their recommendations were implemented by Ronald Reagan when he took office in 1981. So, yeah, this is not exactly, again, not separate from Donald Trump. This is the Donald Trump agenda. But before we begin, something I've been really wanting to share with everybody, Tuesday, October 22nd, Heroes for Democracy, a super show, a live podcast with me along with Brooklyn Dad Defiant and JoJo from Jersey. The three of us are co-hosting with a who's who of top pro-democracy voices and elected officials, big names you definitely know. We're going to be revealing all of those one by one over the next day or so, doing a show from 8 to 10 Eastern. Again, that's Tuesday, the 22nd. We're going to be raising money, not just for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, but also to take back the House for the Democratic Party. And if we do really well, we'll actually start talking about the Senate as well. We're getting together Avengers style and all making sure that we work together to have a really good time talking about the election, talking about the issues, talking about how to give, how to volunteer, how to vote, where to vote, making sure that you're registered to vote, making sure that you make sure that your vote is counted. All of those things we'll be sharing over the course of these 2 hours with a wonderful crew of guests, and we hope that we will see all of you there. For the latest on guests and all the other details, make sure to follow my Twitter. You can also get the latest updates at heroesfordemocracy.org, which will take you directly to the Act Blue page where you can see all of the key information, as well as to make your donation to this important effort to win the White House and the House. Now, let's talk about this week, the Department of Labor. That might at first sound like it's going to be a bit dry, but I'm going to tell you, now, of course, it's my episodes. It's, you love all your episodes. You don't want to play favorites among them. But I got to tell you, this actually, as I was rereading this to get ready for the show, this was a sneakily diabolical section that has not gotten nearly as much play even in more pro-democracy media outlets. The big headlines from Project 2025 have been about things like reproductive rights or about immigration. The labor section is really, really, really bad, and we don't know enough about it, and so that's where we're going to pick up today. So one of the big things that's here, this is insane. They want to eliminate this. This is very dry, and I'll explain why it's very important. They want to eliminate what's referred to as disparate impact liability. What does that mean? This has to do with civil rights and discrimination of folks on the base of race or gender or sexual orientation, for age, for disability, for everything. This cuts across the entire range of civil rights laws regarding employment. And this is very, very key. It is not allowed. It is illegal. It is a basis of liability. This isn't usually, sometimes it can be criminal, but it's usually civil. It is a basis for liability that you were treating different groups in an employee base differently, i.e., the impact on them was disparate, was different. That has been civil rights law for decades. Here's why this is important. Even when you can't prove racist intent, if the impact was racist, then that can be the basis of liability. This is really key. It is a bedrock principle in modern civil rights law in the United States. If you get rid of this, the only civil rights cases that anyone's going to be able to bring are the rarer ones in which a boss or somebody was actually caught saying a racial slur. That's the kind of thing they're going to be able to have to prove discriminatory intent. It is hard to prove someone's intent. You got to really catch them. There's got to be a smoking gun. If you don't have that, you're opening the door. If you don't have the ability to say disparate impact as a basis for liability in civil rights law, you are going to basically be opening the floodgates to wholesale discrimination. And of course, there's already enough discrimination as there is, right? It's not like the current civil rights law got rid of racism. It didn't. But if you want to see racism in the workplace get even worse, along with sexism, along with ableism, along with ageism, along with homophobia, then go ahead, get rid of that. That's going to make it 100 times worse. You're not going to be able to have the check on employers that disparate impact liability provides. So this is very dry, hasn't really been talked about that much, but it's exceptionally important. It will basically be the end of any kind of civil rights law with regard to discrimination in the workplace. It'll be over. So no more civil suits, no more government suits to vindicate the rights of workers who have been discriminatorily treated. It's just going to be a mess. So they're going to be able to say, great, we're just going to pay all of our black workers less. We're going to make sure that we fire all of our gay workers much more systematically. We're going to get rid of them as soon as we see that they're out, right? That's the kind of thing that's going to happen. It happens already. It's going to happen even more if Donald Trump has his say, wins the election, and is able to implement Project 2025. They also want to allow federal contractors to discriminate, and they specifically want to allow employers to discriminate against the LGBTQ community. This is, of course, it follows from some of these other things that I'm talking about here. And then we get to this gem, this just wonderful gem here. I'm going to quote here from page 586. Religious employers are free to run their businesses according to their religious beliefs, general non-discrimination laws notwithstanding. Let's unpack this. This is the re-implementation of Jim Crow in an extremely boring sounding sentence. This is water fountains. It is swimming pools. It is segregation all over again. It's apartheid in a few words. That's what that is. That basically would say that all a racist person needs to do, and mind you, the way that they phrase this, it makes it clear that it might apply only first to employees, but trust me, they would then extend it to customers. This has been a right-wing wet dream for decades, is to get rid of the civil rights acts of the 60s, to bring back the ability of companies to be able to discriminate and segregate as much as they want. But that's what this is. The tip of a much larger racist iceberg is right here in this document. Because at that point, general non-discrimination laws notwithstanding, at that point, all a racist needs to do to engage in blatant racism, to say, I'm not going to let them come in my store, I'm not going to let them work in my company, is to say, well, it's my faith. My faith says that I shouldn't be treating these people in a humane way, in an equal way. General non-discrimination laws notwithstanding. It's a giant loophole. It's a complete circumvention. It's basically saying those laws about equality and equal treatment, equal respect that are on the books are not going to apply to them. That has been something they have been pursuing through the courts for years, as many of you know. right? That's things like the Hobby Lobby case. They've been at this for a while. They want to enshrine it in federal law. They want to enshrine it in executive orders. They want to go further than that. Then they want to gut the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, and have it not focus on race or sexual discrimination at all, which is weird because that's the purpose of the organization. I'm actually then confused about who it would still serve. Maybe I guess it would say, oh, you got discriminated against, you unfortunate little white man. We're going to help you. Is that what it would be? Oh, you didn't get to live out your faith by being as racist as you want to be because somehow you read the Bible to be about inequality. Okay, that's an interesting reading. But go ahead. Yes, we're going to let you do that. That's what the EEOC is now about. I think that's where they're going with that. It keeps going. They actually want to go even further to hurt workers, all workers, by getting rid of overtime. Yes, you heard that right. They want to get rid of overtime by coming up with more ways that employers can interestingly, creatively calculate hours so that they don't have to provide overtime pay, time and a half pay. Time and a half overtime pay is one of the key ways that a lot of folks manage to work their way out of lower income jobs and work their way up because they work extra hours, they get that time and a half pay, and they're able to make a better life for themselves. It is the way a lot of hardworking Americans climb up through the system currently in a world that's increasingly hostile to that. And of course, the Republicans' attitude is, it's like J.D. Vance in the debate recently, where it was clear that he had benefited from, as a child, pretty much just a sort of, smorgasbord of federal programs that paid for his education, that paid for his family's health care, that paid for food stamps, paid for all sorts of things that he and his family benefited from that he now wants to eliminate. But of course, that's what they want to do. So they want to take the laws that we've had in the books that have actually helped a lot of people climb up and get rid of them. So they want to actually give employers the ability to take things that are now legal requirements and turn them into what they sort of deem negotiable defaults. But what that means is that instead of having a requirement that everybody has to have, it's going to be, oh, that's a negotiable default. Then they can turn around and bully the workers into giving up their rights. So they can say, oh, well, we're going to make a nicer break room for you, and we're going to kill your overtime. And by the way, just making sure they sort of spread the word or, get rid of a couple people as examples. If you oppose us on this, we're just going to fire you. That's the kind of thing you're going to see if you actually take things that are currently now requirements and you make them defaults. There's a big, 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 big difference in a regulatory regime and a legal regime between those two things. And of course, the right-wing people, the Donald Trump people, they know this. That's why they're doing this. They want to do even more. They want to gut child labor laws by allowing teens to work in super dangerous jobs, like meat packing facilities. We're talking literally about the things that we had to legislate out of existence and regulate 100, 120 years ago, right? Look at the listeria outbreak with the Boar's Head plant in Virginia that had gone underinspected or uninspected and had pools of blood and feces and caked meat particulate on the walls and everywhere on the equipment and hadn't been cleaned in God knows how long. That's the kind of stuff out of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which was from 1906, that led to the first major piece of food safety legislation at the federal level in 1907, signed by Teddy Roosevelt, who's on Mount Rushmore. He's like ancient history. That's how far back you've got to go. We thought these were settled issues for people that were like long ago in the dust. And now we're actually having to refight these battles because these crazy right wingers are now saying that, like, oh, forget about that. Let's just Upton Sinclair's The Jungle also had heartbreaking, just like gut-wrenching scenes regarding children that were working in these meatpacking plants in Chicago created a national scandal and an outpouring of support for the government to do something about these horrible things. They want to bring all that back. Then it goes in other directions, like visas for workers, which, it has an immigration angle as well. But of course, they're going to apply some xenophobia to doing this. They want to kill off certain worker visas, including the H-2A visa, which has to do with seasonal workers in the food industry, in agriculture. They want to kill that off. Why? Because they want to be anti-Latino. But the real impact here, in addition to discrimination and just hate, is going to be that they're going to drastically increase the price of food. They're going to add to inflation horribly if they implement this. Check out page 611. So when Donald Trump and his cronies want to go bang, bang, bang about, Democrats, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, inflation, the things that they're going to do with tariffs and with these visas are going to have a horrible, horrible impact on inflation. It's going to jack up inflation. It's going to make our daily goods cost a lot more if they get their way through Project 2025 and being able to implement it in the new year. And I think an interesting point to drive home here is that throughout the rest of this document, the default mode for a lot of these right-wing think tanks is, for a long time, had been historically, if you go back further, they've always been kind of an interesting blend of racism and free market policies or free market sounding policies. But increasingly, more and more as time has gone on, especially with the Trump era. This had started a while ago, but it's accelerated in the last 10 years. Whenever they've got a conflict or a choice between their racism and their supposedly free market tendencies, they choose the racism. All right. The idea of restricting the labor market by not allowing workers to come into the country when they're needed, when there's a market need for them, employers want them to come because there's a demand for them to be there and there's a supply of workers. You've got the demand, you've got the supply, and instead the Trumpers want to come in and cut that off and say, you know what, we don't want that because we would rather throw a bone to our racist MAGA base. That's what they're doing. So they're actually throwing their free market principles under the bus just to get some red hat folks to vote for them. That's what they're doing. That's been the further degradation. And not that the free market policies were all that in a bag of chips, because in many cases they were just, they were really a dressed up version of not liking certain people. A lot of the time that was, often the pretense was free market. The reality was racism or xenophobia or, some other type of hate. But now it's just like overt. Again, they're saying the quiet part out loud. And when these things come into conflict, they are then going ahead and choosing the racism. But then let's talk also about their plans for the Department of Transportation. Not surprisingly, given what we know about some of the other sections of the document, there's a strongly pro-fossil fuel, anti-environmental tendency that runs through this. They want to attack fuel efficiency standards. That's been something that the auto industry has been whining about ever since they were first implemented over 50 years ago. Never mind the fact that they've been actually a great success, not only at reducing emissions, but also in making cars cleaner, safer, more competitive, all of those things. Requirements and safety requirements have done much the same. Requirements have actually been a spur to innovation and have actually helped the American auto industry remain much more competitive. And it's saved lives in a lot of cases. If you talk about things like seatbelt requirements, airbag requirements, if it had been left to the auto industry alone, they never would have put those things in cars. Or maybe they eventually would have gotten around to it as foreign cars had those things. But the American government said, no, you're going to have to do it. And it saved a lot of lives that way. And we've saved a lot of lives through lower emissions, through fewer respiratory problems. The amount of health that is improved by having lower emissions, by having less smog. These things are very hard to calculate, but they can be calculated. And of course, these right-wing interests don't actually care about any of that stuff. They just care about whatever's going to make them an easy buck. Along those same lines, they want to kill consumer protection in air travel. That's on page 630. They want to kill mass transit. Of course they do. That's page 635. They want to cut pay for union workers that work in the transit world. That's page 636. So that's fun. Again, if anybody wants to run around thinking that somehow Donald Trump is the champion of the common man, actually go through. And I think maybe I'll do like a run through at some point here because it's a through line that's not just in the labor section, although we just talked about that a good bit. But if you go through the entire document, the number of anti-union, anti-worker things that are in here is just absolutely astounding. But Donald Trump is the very last person that anybody should be looking to if you want some sort of champion for the working man. He is not that guy. He has golden toilets. He inherited $400 million from his father and flushed it down the drain. And his Project 2025 is one of the most anti-worker documents that I think we've seen in American politics in probably about a century. Finally, I'm going to end on one more note here for the transportation section. This should make people have some pause, especially given the East Palestine train disaster from a couple years ago. They want to gut rail safety. They want to operate trains with only one crew member. So imagine a huge freight train that's a mile and a half long, has dozens and dozens of cars, is pulling millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of weight, and it's going through your town, and that entire train is run by one guy. How does that work? What happens when that person sneezes or goes to the bathroom or has a medical condition crop up and suddenly can't? Think of all of the different things that could happen in that situation. Do you want one person operating that giant train? Is that seriously what you... That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. God forbid that you actually have to pay two people to operate that train. No. We want to make it so that only one person can operate that train. The sheer just cheapness and pettiness and just evil that it takes to think that. And it's a weird sort of evil because it's an evil in this really like dorky policy kind of way, but it's just evil. Why are you doing that? You're going to take something that already has been shown to need maybe some improvements and you're going to water it down and make it less safe. I think maybe someone writing this document was smart enough not to also then talk about watering down air safety even more or airplane manufacturing safety even more. But just imagine what that same attitude is going to do for, say, the ability for Boeing to kind of produce planes however they want to. And then finally for this week, we're going to talk briefly about the Veterans Administration, where there is an enormous amount of cutting and cronyism that, again, these are through lines throughout the entire document, but check out pages 650 to 653 of the document. Health benefits are going to get cut. It's going to take longer for people to get treatment. Their benefits are going to be less. There's going to be more red tape, and there's going to be a lot more cronyism. They've made it clear that they want to staff more and more of the VA, which is by employment level. They actually say this in the document, that it's one of the larger agencies in the federal government by headcount, and yet somehow it has a very low number of political appointees, and they want to change that. So in other words, they're like, this is a delicious bit of pork here that we need to take over and take for ourselves. We're going to stick all of our little people in there and give them a bunch of bullshit jobs. And then they'll be able to do our bidding, and they'll make it harder for veterans to get care, but they'll be doing okay. And then they can go back out to the private sector and then maybe try to start companies that will privatize different parts of the VA so that they get to benefit from something that should be part of the public good. The Kremlinization, as I like to call it, that runs through this entire document, and the VA would not be immune from that. So we have that to look forward to if Donald Trump were to win and be able to implement Project 2025. That's it for today, but we've got two more of these to go where we're going to be talking about Donald Trump and Project 2025's plans for the American economy. A lot to do there. Treasury, with SEC, tax policy, a whole bunch of other things. So keep an eye out and an ear out for those coming up. Make sure you follow this podcast. That way you'll be able to get all of these episodes, including for Decoding Project 2025, as well as the main Taking Down Trump episodes, all delivered to all of your devices automatically. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter and subscribe to me for free on Substack, where we are also engaging in a lot of decoding of Project 2025. And we will see you next time.